Hi everyone, my name is Megan Jones and I'm the Seattle director of an organization called Factory Farming Awareness Coalition, or FFAC for short. So we are a nonprofit organization that got started down in the Bay Area, and since our start we have spread to about 10 different regions across the nation. What we do is go into a lot of schools and community organizations, environmental groups, and just talk to people about where our food comes from. So today specifically, we're going to cover a lot of information. We're going to go over everything from what a factory farm is, what it looks like, what some of the main components are. We'll go through a factory farm's impact on environment, on our health as humans, and then at the end, we're going to go over some solutions of different things that we can all do to get involved to really start to combat some of these issues. So before we get started, I always like to give a little debrief that I'm not here to scar anyone for life, so I'm not going to be showing anything bloody or gory or anything like that. But we are going to cover quite a bit of information. So at the end of the presentation, I'll leave a bunch of contact information so that you can always reach out if you have any questions. We will also have what are called cuteness interludes in between sections of cute baby animal photos as a stopping point. Those are great places to stop the video, to maybe talk as a group about some questions that came up, some different things that came up as I was presenting. You can also write all those questions out and send them to us. Like I said, I'll have that contact info at the end, or just take it as a moment to just pause, think about some of the information that you've heard. So I always like to get started by thinking about Old MacDonald Had a Farm. For a lot of us, this was a song that we sang about as kids. But for many of us at the same time, when we're told to picture where our food comes from or to imagine a farm, we're probably reminded of that Old MacDonald's farm that we sang about when we were younger. So we might picture the big red barn, the green grassy rolling hills, the bright blue skies, the happy cows that come from California. What I'm here to talk about today is how different this image is from the reality of how the majority of our food is actually produced. Nowadays, rather than the old McDonald's farms we might have had in the past, we now have what are called concentrated animal feeding operations, also known as CAFOs for short. And these are facilities where we keep thousands and sometimes even tens of thousands of animals very intensely confined. Now, we use these facilities for two main reasons. The first is that here in the United States, we love the taste of these animal products. And in order to meet the high demand for these products, we need to raise a lot of animals. The second reason is profit. By packing as many animals as possible into these spaces, farmers are able to maximize the amount of money that they're making when they're creating those final products. So that being said, I want everyone to think about this question for just a second. Think about it in your head, try and come up with an answer. For how many animals you think are raised and killed for meat, eggs, and dairy in the United States every single year? So just land animals, just cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, just the United States, just in 1 year's time. So in most of the classes that I speak to, people will guess maybe tens of thousands, like 10,000, 20,000, maybe 50,000. Sometimes we'll get up into the hundreds of thousands, like 250,000, 500,000. Occasionally we'll get up into the millions, like 5 million. Maybe we'll even get into the hundreds of millions, like 250 million. Not many people guess the right answer, which is actually 9 billion with a B. Now, to put this number into perspective, because it's a pretty big number to try to imagine, there are about 7.3 billion humans on the entire planet, and this is 9 billion, which is even greater than that. These are just cows, pigs, chickens, turkeys, the animals that we'd be growing in order to consume them or their products. So globally, this number looks a little bit closer to something like 75 billion animals per year. When we start to include fish and seafood, it's anywhere from 200 to 300 billion animals every single year. And if we think back to just the United States, just in 1 year's time and just land animals, that's about 1 million animals every single hour, which is about the length of this presentation. All right, I've got one more question for you. So again, take a second, maybe pause the video to throw out some guesses. What percentage of these 9 billion animals do you think are raised on a factory farm on one of those concentrated animal feeding operations instead of Old MacDonald's family-owned smaller scale farm? Again, I often get guesses in around 50%, 60, maybe we get up to 75, 85. I think the highest I usually get to is about 90% when people guess. But the real answer is actually 99%. And what this means is that pretty much every single time we're buying meat, eggs, or dairy, that animal was raised on a factory farm. This is even true if we're getting our groceries from places like Whole Foods, Sprout, those natural grocery stores that tend to be more expensive. 99% is virtually 100% of the time. In fact, the 1% of the time that this isn't true is if maybe your neighbors happen to raise chickens in their backyard and that's where you're getting your eggs from, or you're really going out of your way, you're doing your research, you're making an effort, you're speaking to farmers at farmers markets, you've seen exactly where the animals were raised, you have a very clear understanding of exactly how and where those animals or those products are coming from. But for the average person, for the rest of us, when we go to the grocery store or get some food from, McDonald's or a fast food restaurant, about 100% of the time in those cases, these products are being raised on factory farms. So this isn't just a small amount of time. And I really encourage you all to keep these numbers in mind as we go throughout the presentation, just to keep in mind how big of an industry this is, how widespread of an industry this is as well. But let's talk a little bit more about what life is like for the animals on these factory farms. So this is a quote from National Hog Farmer magazine. It's a magazine created by pig farmers for pig farmers. They say the breeding sow, and a breeding sow is a female pig who's used to breed more pigs for the pork industry, because if we want to eat a lot of bacon, we need to raise a lot of pigs. So the breeding sow should be thought of and treated as a valuable piece of machinery whose function is to pump out baby pigs like a sausage machine. So if we pay attention to the language that we're using in this quote, we can see that they're being labeled as machinery, as something that we can use to maximize our profit, to increase productivity. They're not talking about her like she's an individual, and they're not really taking into account the lived experience of this breeding sow. But this is the mindset behind this industry that allows them to treat the animals in the ways that they do, that allows us to view them not as individuals, but as products. So when we look at this in a little bit more detail, when we look specifically at that breeding sow we just talked about in the last quote, this is an example of how she'll be spending a large portion of her life. This is what's called a gestation crate. As you can see, the bars on either side of her are so close up against the sides of her body that she actually can't even turn herself around. So she can stand up or lie down, but not move side to side. She's kept in this gestation crate or in a similarly sized farrowing crate for the entire time that she's pregnant with her young and nursing her young, which can be anywhere from a few months all the way up to a few years at a time, depending on how many times she's impregnated. Then there is the dairy industry. So when I go into schools and talk to people about dairy, I often ask them to tell me what they think of when they think of where milk comes from, or what they think is necessary in order for a cow to produce that milk. We all know that, cow's milk is very popular here in the United States, especially, but we don't often think about what has to happen for that milk to be poured into our glass or to go into that ice cream that we're consuming. But cows are mammals, just like us humans, which means that they only produce milk when they've recently given birth to a calf, and they're only producing that milk in order to feed those calves. Now, if the calf was allowed to stay with their mother, then that calf would be drinking all their mother's milk, and we wouldn't have as much milk to turn into things like cheese or yogurt or ice cream. So the way that the dairy industry works is that cows are artificially inseminated once every single year. She's pregnant for 9 months out of the year. She'll give birth to a calf, and that calf is immediately taken away from her so that we can begin the milking process. If that calf is female, she's of value to the dairy industry. She can be raised up to produce dairy just like her mother did. If that calf is male, though, male mammals can't produce milk. And so that calf is of no value to the dairy industry. Instead, he'll be sold into the veal industry. And what you're looking at in this photo is what's called a veal crate. It's where that veal calf will actually spend his entire life. As you can see, he can take maybe a step in any direction, but that's the only movement that he's allowed. He'll stay in this crate for his entire life, which is only about 2 or 3 months before being sent to slaughter. So next we're going to talk about layer hens. Layer hens are the hens that are responsible for laying the eggs that we might consume, so separate from the chickens that we might be eating from meat, which is actually an entirely different industry entirely. And what you're looking at in this photo is what's called a battery cage. Battery cages are where about 85% or the vast majority of layer hens will spend their entire lives. In these battery cages, again, this industry is trying to maximize their profit. So they'll stuff as many as 7 to 8 birds in one single cage so that they can fit about 50,000 birds into one single industrial shed. What that means is that each individual bird only has about the amount of space as a single piece of paper. So if you've got a piece of notebook paper in front of you, you take a look at that and you imagine the size of a chicken standing on top of that, you might notice that that's not quite enough space for her to stretch out her wings or really move around at all. She will spend her entire life in this cage. She will never at any point be able to stretch out, run around, see the outdoors, be outside, or participate in any of the natural behaviors that she otherwise would. And after about a year of these living conditions, due to the stress of the conditions, she's not able to lay as many eggs as she used to. So instead, she'll be sent to slaughter and turned into a very cheap, low-quality chicken product. So typically something that we might be eating if we're getting like chicken nuggets from a fast food restaurant or the frozen section. The last slide that I have for us on standard practice with animals is of the turkeys on our turkey farms. So think about turkey like on our turkey sandwiches, if we have turkey bacon, or the turkeys that we might be eating on Thanksgiving. So as you can see, they're not raised in those battery cages like the last slide, but as you can also see, they're pretty intensely confined still. There's a lot of them all packed into a small space. And if you take a look at their beaks specifically, you might notice something that looks a little odd. This is actually the result of a process called debeaking. Debeaking is where the industry uses a laser to actually slice off the sharp ends of their beaks. And you might be thinking that sounds super random or unnatural, and you might be wondering why the industry would be doing that. But if you could imagine for just a second that you are not just in your house right now watching this on a video, but that you're in a room that has so many people in it, you can't even stretch out your arms or legs or lie down at the end of the night when you want to go to sleep. Then imagine you're in that super crowded room every minute of every day until the end of the school year, or maybe even the end of next school year. As you can imagine, that would be pretty stressful. And you might have to deal with that stress in different ways, and one of those ways might be getting into fights. You might be fighting over space, you might be fighting because your neighbor bumped into you and you're really stressed out and hot and hungry and tired, you haven't been sleeping very well. That's exactly what happens with these birds. They start getting into fights. So rather than open up, give them more space, prevent those fights from occurring in the first place, that would cost a lot more money. That would require building bigger sheds, building more sheds. So instead, the industry found it was cheaper, it was easier to just cut off their ability to cause too much damage when they did get into these fights. Birds have a lot of nerve endings in the ends of their beaks. So this is not only very acutely painful when it happens, but it can also cause chronic pain throughout their lives. And this isn't just something that would be occurring for turkeys, but also for the broiler chickens that we eat for chicken meat, as well as our layer hens as well. So now that we've talked about the standard procedure, I do want to address a couple labels that we might have heard of, or maybe our parents have picked those up on the shelves. Maybe we have picked them up off the shelves at grocery stores. You might have heard of labels like cage-free, free-range, organic, natural, humane. There are some others out there as well. I want to briefly go through what those would look like. Starting off with cage-free. So this is an example of what a cage-free facility would look like. As you can see, the birds are not being raised in those battery cages, so they would not be placed 7 to 8 birds in one single cage. But that's really the only difference between cage-free and traditionally factory-farmed eggs. As you can see, they are still going to try to maximize their profit by sticking in as many birds as possible, which means that they will still be very intensely confined. They're still raised in industrial sheds, which means they have no access to sunlight, to the outdoors, to be able to stretch out, run around. And because of these intensive confinement conditions, because there's so many of them in such a small space, those fights would still be breaking out, and so debeaking would still be occurring even with this cage-free label. But you might be thinking, okay, that's cage-free, but what about free range? Now, free range is a bit different. Free range, legally speaking, means that an animal is required to have what's called access to the outdoors. But what this access can look like in practice, or what it legally means, is just that they have access at some point. So we have one example here up on the slide from Judy's family farm. On the left-hand side, what you're looking at is a photo of the back of the egg carton, so you'd actually picking up in the store. That quote in yellow says these hens are raised in wide open spaces in Sonoma Valley where they're free to roam, scratch, and play. But on the right-hand side is an overhead aerial view of what Judy's actually looks like. So you can see there's not a single bird outside roaming, scratching, or playing. You can see the industrial sheds that they're raised in. Now, Judy's was sued for this. They said that you're misleading customers, that you can't be claiming they're in these conditions, and then these are the actual conditions. But the only thing that changed as a result of that lawsuit was that they changed a bit of the wording on the back of the package. They are still housed and raised in the exact same conditions. They are still labeled and sold as free range. This is because with the free range label, they just have to have that access at some point, as I said before. What this can look like in practice is birds still being raised indoors in an industrial shed. There can be a very small door at one end of that shed that opens into a very small dirt patch, or even a small cement patch that's covered almost like a screened porch. Even if that door is only open for a portion of the day, even if not a single bird ever actually exits the shed, that door can be shut and those products can be labeled and sold as free range. So just something to be aware of. And I always like to address in this slide as well, if we think back to that 99% statistic, you might look at this slide and say, okay, well, this is just Judy's. I'll just avoid Judy's. I'll just look out for that brand. But it's important to note that Judy's not only sells the brand or the eggs under their own brand, but they're also a supplier for many different brands, including Whole Foods 365 brand and Organic Valley, which might be some brands that you're more familiar with. I don't know about you, but I get a ton of Organic Valley ads on my YouTube, like constantly. So we might see these brands and think of them as being the humane standard, but they're still being supplied to from factory farms, which is why that 99% statistic is still true, even when we're shopping at those more natural, more highly regarded stores. So the last label that I'm going to go in depth about is organic. Organic often is thought of as this catch-all term that means everything about a product is great, but it's important to understand what organic actually means. So when it comes to things like produce, organic would mean the absence of any pesticides or herbicides when that product is being grown. Same thing for when animals are being raised. They wouldn't be eating any food that has any herbicides or pesticides on it. They wouldn't be given any growth hormones, no antibiotics, no pesticides. However, that's really the only difference. There's not a whole lot in terms of the way that an animal would be raised that you would need to prove in order to use that organic label. They would be uncaged, but still raised inside barns with outdoor access. And as we saw in the last slide, that outdoor access just doesn't always mean as much as we might think that it means. Other standard practices like debeaking, like we talked about, as well as things like cutting off horns, tails, ears without anesthetic, castration without anesthetic, all of that would be standard legal practice, even under the organic label. We might see other labels like natural or humane, and it's interesting to know that actually natural and humane have zero legal definition whatsoever. That means that any product produced in any way with any ingredients can slap the label natural or humane on it, and there's no governing organization that will go through and discover who is or is not using that term. So important to realize that there are some labels that don't really have any sort of definition at all. All right, so that is going to bring us to our first cuteness interlude. So again, this is a great stopping point, great place if we need to pause the video to have a class discussion. If you want to write down any questions that you've got, again, I'm going to be leaving contact information at the end of the video, so you can always send those questions to us. We'd be more than happy to help out with those. Or just take a moment to process the information. I know that first section had a lot in it. Once you're done pausing the video, you can rejoin us, and next we're going to talk about the environment. So when we talk about the environmental impact of this industry, it's been really actually fun to be in so many schools to see how much students know about environmental impacts. I know when I was in high school, we barely talked about climate change at all. I could not have told you like any of the details. But nowadays I go into schools, people know who Greta Thunberg is. They know what climate change is. We're hearing about it more on social media. We're hearing about it more in politics, in regular media, all over the news. We know about the fires burning in the Amazon rainforest. We know about the flooding that is occurring in different areas. We know about droughts occurring in different areas as well. We are really, really aware of all these different situations. But what I've also noticed is that while we're talking more about the environment and different things that we do that can impact it, that conversation tends to center around a couple different notorious industries. So we talk about transportation, we talk about oil, we talk about plastic. We don't often talk about the role that animal agriculture plays, despite the fact that animal agriculture is actually one of the single most destructive industries on the planet. And you might be thinking that that makes no sense at all, that these are just cows out in a pasture. How could that possibly be so bad? But we have to remember that there are over 9 billion of these animals being raised every single year in the United States alone. That is a lot more than us humans. In fact, there's only about 322 million humans in the United States. What this means is that we have to grow enough food to feed 9 billion animals instead of just growing enough food to feed about 300 million Americans. These farmed animals are predominantly fed a diet of genetically modified corn and genetically modified soy, and we need quite a bit of land in order to grow enough food to feed all these animals. In fact, if you've heard about the fires burning in the Amazon rainforest, you might be wondering why those fires are burning or what is causing those. But we actually found that the leading cause of these fires was farmers who were using the fires in order to clear cut section of the Amazon in order to grow corn and soy to feed their livestock or to make space for their livestock to graze directly. So it's this growing global demand for beef that is causing us to destroy natural ecosystem, natural habitat, in order to prioritize space for these animals that we consume, that we can profit off of. This is having very significant impacts on our biodiversity loss. In fact, when we look at who's left on the planet today and we look at mammals specifically, only 4% of mammals left on the planet are actually wild animals. While around 1/3 of mammals on the planet are human, but around 2/3 of animals on the planet are actually livestock that are here because of our demands for diet. So we know that these crops need a lot of land to grow. What else do plants need to grow? We know they need sunlight, and we know that they need water. And we have to use a lot of water to keep all these plants alive. Often when we're told to reduce the amount of water that we're using at home, we're told to do simple things like take shorter showers, turn off the faucet when brushing our teeth, maybe flush the toilet less often, or get a low flow toilet. We might hear slogans like if it's yellow, let it mellow, if it's brown, flush it down. That's always one of my favorites. We hear to take military showers, where we're only turning on the water when we absolutely need it, maybe to get low flow appliances, low flow faucets. We might hear to do full loads of laundry, full loads in the dishwasher, not using that whole wash cycle just for 1 or 2 items. But what many of us don't realize is that we should also be paying attention to what we eat. In fact, 1 gallon of cow's milk requires the same amount of water to produce that you will use in about a month's worth of showers. That's because it takes about 660 gallons of water to produce just 1 gallon of milk. This is the same exact statistic as for 1 beef hamburger patty, about a month's worth of showers to create just 1 patty. But the great thing about this statistic is what this means is that if you were to go out to dinner with your friends over the weekend, and the restaurant that you go to has a veggie burger on the menu and you decide to order that veggie burger, you have just saved hundreds of gallons of water just in that one simple choice. You do not have to be vegan or vegetarian to order the burger off the menu. I promise you, no one is going to ask to see your vegan ID. No one's going to double check that you are plant-based. But if you order that, you can do a lot for our environment. Same exact thing with milk. I know that not all of us are going to the store and buying like gallons and gallons of milk off of grocery store shelves, but a lot of us do go to Starbucks. We do get our coffee. Coffee shops are another great place where we can significantly reduce the amount of water that we're using. Replacing the cow's milk in your latte at Starbucks for something like soy milk, oat milk, hemp milk is a great way to save hundreds of gallons of water every single time we make that choice. And it's not that big of a lifestyle choice to imagine or change to imagine making. In fact, you might hear different things about different milks. So sometimes we hear that almond milk uses quite a bit of water. When we look at this graphic, we can see that it does when you compare it to other forms of non-dairy milk, but it still uses significantly less water than cow's milk. So if almond milk is your favorite non-dairy milk, you're good to go there. It's still using less. You could, do something like try oat or soy, which would have a bit less of an environmental impact. But almond, you can look at the land use. That would be significantly lower than cow's milk. The carbon emissions, that would be significantly lower. And the water use, that is slightly lower as well. Oat milk is one of my favorites to bring up because oat milk can be pretty easily made at home, actually. Oats are pretty cheap as well. You can pick up oats in the bulk section. You soak them overnight in water. In the morning, you can squeeze all the water out and you just created your own oat milk. And you can also add in things like maple syrup or cinnamon. There are a bunch of recipes online. So if you're looking to do more low waste or waste-free living, if you're looking to do something kind of on the cheap or do a new science experiment, cannot recommend oat milk enough for that. All right, so we've got these 9 billion animals and they are alive, which means they eat food and they drink water, and that also means that they poop. And farmed animals here in the United States produce a lot more waste than the entire human population. And while we might have fancy flushing toilets with different flush settings and heated toilet seats even sometimes, it's not as if the cows, pigs, turkeys, chickens on these factory farms are using flushing toilets. So I have a video clip here to show us that will look at what exactly is happening on these factory farms.
One of America's biggest secrets is that farms practically don't exist anymore. The animals we eat are grown inside giant hidden factories. I've been secretly planning a project to expose these factory farms using drones. This video provides just a sample of what I saw during only a few days of filming. You're looking at a lake of toxic pig feces and urine, the size of 4 football fields. That's because thousands upon thousands of pigs are inside of these buildings. Their waste falls through slats in the concrete floor, and it's flushed directly into this giant open-air cesspool. How many of these kinds of factories are there? In North Carolina alone, there are over 2,000. And the consequences are disastrous.
The waste falls through the floors. It's flushed out into an open pit, like a cesspool. It's easy for a big hog operation to have as much waste as a medium-sized city. Of course, the pit will fill up, so it has to be emptied, and they're emptied by spraying the liquid waste.
Yes, you heard that right.
If you're familiar with a garden sprayer, they're gigantic versions of that. So they're making droplets, fine mists out of this liquid waste, and that can drift downwind into the neighboring communities.
I shut my hog operation down and I got out of it. And I just couldn't do another person that way to make them smell that. It is a cesspool that you put feces and urine in, a hole in the ground that you dump a toxic waste in. And I've seen dead hogs in them and stuff like that.
People can't open their windows, they can't go outside.
I've seen it. I've talked to the people. I've seen the little children that say, Mom and Daddy, why we got to smell this stuff? You get stories like, I can't hang my clothes out. Feces and urine odor comes by and attaches itself to your clothes. And then people will say, we're scared to invite neighbors.
It can, I think, very correctly be called environmental racism or environmental injustice, that people of color, low-income people, bear the brunt of these practices.
This is where they spray animal waste on us. This is about 8 feet from my mother's house.
What is it like when the mist is...
It's like, you think it's raining?
Really?
You think it's raining. We don't open the doors of the windows, but the odor still comes in. It takes your breath away. Then you start gagging, you get headaches.
Who's responsible for all this? Smithfield Foods, specifically the subdivision Murphy Brown, which controls the factory farms shown in all of the drone footage in this video. Smithfield is by far the largest pork producer in the entire world. And inside these buildings, there is something else entirely.
Pigs are really intelligent animals. They are more intelligent than dogs. They are more intelligent than cats. In the average pig barn, there could be hundreds, if not thousands of pigs crammed into this one sprawling indoor space. Their entire life is spent standing on concrete floors. Mother pigs are locked in metal cages so small that they literally cannot even turn around for months at a time.
This is not a partisan issue. We are all opposed to children being made sick, to animals being abused, and to everyday people's lives being ruined by the stench of cesspools in their backyards. These thousands of lakes of toxic waste must be among the most bizarre and disturbing environmental phenomena that have ever confronted America. And they've been kept well hidden from the public for long enough.
All right, so a couple important things to note about the video. You might have seen how they were spraying the waste over those neighboring populations. The intent is to use that spray as manure or as fertilizer for the crops, but because they're just spraying it into the air, the wind can pick it up, not only blow it into those neighboring communities, impacting their air quality and their health. We see higher rates of asthma among children, higher rates of upper respiratory infections among adults, but it can also actually get into their water sources as well. So it's something that can impact people living nearby in the way that they might not even be able to use their tap water at home. They'd have to either boil it to sanitize it first, or bring in an alternate source entirely. So these communities that are living nearby these factory farms are just another important community to be aware of as being impacted when we're making our choice at the grocery store or at the restaurant that we're eating at. All right, so the last thing that I've got to talk about for the environmental side of things is climate change. And this is so important to talk about because animal agriculture actually causes more greenhouse gas emissions than the entire transportation sector combined. That is on a global scale. That means every single car, airplane, bus, train, motorcycle, truck, boat combined still does not produce as many greenhouse gas emissions as our factory farms do. What this means is that we have a great ability to make a change. We'll talk a lot more about that in the solutions section, but we've got a pretty big ability to make changes to our diet. In fact, we found that eating plant-based just for one day cuts your carbon footprint in half for that day. That doesn't mean you have to do it every single day or that you have to commit to a life of being vegan or vegetarian, but the more days that we eat plant-based, the more meals we make plant-based, the more lattes at Starbucks we make plant-based, the lower our carbon footprint will be. So that brings us to our next cuteness interlude. Again, take this time if you need it to pause the video, to have a discussion, to just think some thoughts, process the information. Like I said, take a break if you need to. But if you're ready, we're going to move right along into the health section. All right, so the first thing I'm going to talk about is antibiotics. Now, when we think back to the standard practice of how these animals are being raised, we can see that there are a lot of animals in very small spaces. These aren't the cleanest of conditions either. It's not like these farmed animals are being bathed every single day. They're often living even among their own feces and urine. What this means is that there can be a lot of bacteria present, and then because these animals are so close to one another, that bacteria can very easily be spread from one animal to another. That means that diseases can also be spread very quickly among these animals, and even in some cases from these non-human animals to humans themselves. So the industry had to find a solution to this problem, to this rapid spread of disease that could potentially happen. And their response to this was antibiotics. They decided that they could just pump these farmed animals with antibiotics to prevent the spread of disease. So at this point, about 80% or the vast majority of antibiotics here in the United States are fed directly to animals on these factory farms, not used in the pharmaceutical industry for human use like we might think. But it's important to know how antibiotics work. On a very basic level, antibiotics kill off the weaker bacteria, and the stronger bacteria that survives that antibiotic can then multiply and spread. That bacteria that survives that antibiotic is now antibiotic resistant, meaning those antibiotics will no longer kill that bacteria in the future. So farmers, doctors, scientists have urged that because we're using so many antibiotics on our factory farms, we're actually creating superbugs of antibiotic-resistant bacteria, and we could come to a point in the near future of having antibiotics just no longer work anymore. We have too much antibiotic-resistant bacteria present. This is not just a fear for far off in the future. In fact, it's something that we've already seen start to occur in modern day. MRSA is a bacterial strain that is actually completely antibiotic resistant, and it's also pretty deadly. It kills about 20,000 people living in the United States every year, which is actually more than AIDS. We know that MRSA is linked to factory farming because people just living nearby a factory farm is actually 3 times more likely to be a MRSA carrier. When they went in and tested people that were currently working in pig factory farms, almost half of them tested positive for being completely, for having MRSA. A lot of them had open sores on their arms and legs, and these sores did not respond to any form of antibiotic treatment. This isn't even just a fear, though, for people who are living nearby these factory farms or who are working in this industry. This is something that affects every single one of us at home. Because when the Environmental Working Group went into grocery stores, bought meat that was currently for sale on the shelves, brought it back to their lab and tested it, the vast majority tested positive for antibiotic-resistant bacteria. You can see the numbers up on your screen, but what that means is that if we're not cooking our meat fully enough, or if we're using the same surfaces or utensils as uncooked foods, or if the restaurant that we're going to is not using those best practices for food safety, we could ingest that bacteria and it could make us extremely sick or even kill us because we wouldn't be able to just take an antibiotic that would rid us of that bacterial infection. So in addition to the sort of sporadic antibiotic or bacterial cases, we also need to be aware of the chronic impacts of eating a diet high in animal products. This is a list of the top 10 leading causes of death here in the United States. And the ones in red on here are directly linked to diet, meaning what we're eating can play a role in our likelihood of getting or not getting these diseases. I will say diet is not the only thing that would play a role. There are other things that would definitely play a role, such as genetics or other lifestyle choices, but it is one factor. When we look at these in a bit more detail, when we focus in on heart disease, which is the #1 leading cause of death in the United States, we found that people who eliminated meat from their diet were actually about 1/3 less likely to die from heart disease. This man up here, his name is Kim Williams. He's the president of the American College of Cardiology, so he knows his stuff when it comes to heart health. He himself is entirely plant-based, and he recommends a plant-based diet to all of his patients, so everyone who struggles with those heart health issues. Then when we look at type 2 diabetes specifically, we found that a plant-based diet, so eliminating meat, eggs, and dairy, was actually pretty effective at reversing the disease entirely. That's not to say that it would happen in 100% of cases, but it is really incredible to know that this is a potential thing, a lifestyle change that people can make that struggle with type 2 diabetes that could actually reverse this disease, that would require them to no longer be checking their blood sugar levels, to no longer be taking insulin, just by making a lifestyle switch with diet. It was actually found to be more effective at reversing diabetes than the ADA recommended diet. So definitely something to think about. I will say I'm not a doctor, so you would definitely want to get a doctor on board if you have type 2 diabetes and we're thinking about making the switch. Definitely would want that professional opinion, but it's definitely something to be aware of. So then another one on that list was cancer. And it's very interesting to look at the differences in what we're eating and the links with cancer. In fact, recently the World Health Organization did a comprehensive review that looked at thousands of different studies that were looking at links between meats and cancer. After reviewing these thousands of studies, they definitively stated that processed meats, so things like hot dog, bacon, pepperoni, sausage, were a group 1 carcinogen. Group 1 carcinogens are things that we know for a fact cause cancer, that there is enough evidence to support that there are very strong bonds between that lifestyle or that product and cancer. That same review found that red meat, even if unprocessed, so meats like pork, beef, and lamb, are a group 2A carcinogen. Group 2A carcinogens are very likely to cause cancer. These are things that there is a lot of evidence to support that they do, just not quite enough evidence yet to say that they definitively do, but that the evidence is pointing in that direction. And you might be wondering, okay, well, what does that mean in terms of risk? A recent study conducted at USC found that people who were eating a lot of animal products in their diet were actually just as likely to die of cancer as people who were regularly smoking cigarettes. So we see on MTV the anti-smoking commercials that we, learn about in health classes, why smoking can be, a risky choice to make. We know at this point that when we're increasing the number of cigarettes that we're smoking, we are increasing our risk for lung cancer. But this study shows us that by eating a lot of animal products in our diet, we are increasing our risk of other cancers by the exact same amount. We've also seen that there's a positive association between eating a lot of animal products and obesity rates. We found that plant-based diets can be, in some cases, very effective at helping people keep weight off, lose weight. It's not going to cause people to yo-yo diet as much as others, but again, you would definitely want to get a doctor on board to make sure you're getting all the nutrients that you need in order to be eating healthily. So doctors actually are beginning to catch on, and it's been really amazing to see. They're starting to recognize that eating a plant-based diet can be a very healthy way to get all of our nutrients and to prevent some of these different cancers like we talked about and other diseases. And you might be thinking, okay, well, none of this applies to me because I'm an athlete and I need to eat animal proteins in order to gain muscle, in order to be competitive. There is a really cool new documentary that just came out on Netflix called Game Changers, and I've got the trailer to show you all right now.
One and only Arnold Schwarzenegger.
I ate a lot of meat. They showed us commercials.
Steak, that's what a man eats.
Selling that idea that real men eat meat.
Serious man food.
But you got to understand, that's marketing. That's not based on reality.
I've been teaching fighting techniques to government agencies for more than 15 years. Then I got injured. Unable to teach for at least 6 months, I spent more than 1,000 hours studying science on recovery and nutrition, and stumbled across a study about the Roman gladiators.
The gladiators were predominantly vegetarian.
How could the original professional fighters be so powerful? eating only plants.
When I made the switch to a plant-based diet, I qualified for my 3rd Olympic team. I broke 2 American records. I was like, man, I should have done this a long while ago.
When I went plant-based, I wasn't sure if I was gonna survive. And I actually became like a machine.
One of the biggest misconceptions in sports nutrition is that we have to have animal protein to perform at a high level. That's just not true.
Sometimes you have to do things that you know your competitors aren't doing.
Today's blood and yesterday's blood.
Sam. I think this is going to wake a lot of people up.
I was recovering better, not getting as sore. This was our best season in the last 15 years, and we had 14 guys on plant-based diets.
We all want to feel great, have more energy.
Cholesterol was 276. Today, 169.
Whoa, now you're talking.
Most guys my age can keep up with the grandchildren. My grandchildren can't keep up with me.
It's not one set of dietary guidelines for improving your performance as an athlete, another one for reversing heart disease, reversing diabetes. It's the same for all of them.
Someone asked me, how could you get as strong as an ox without eating any meat? And my answer was, have you ever seen an ox eating meat?
All right, so it's called The Game Changers. It's a documentary that just came out last October on Netflix. So if you've got access to Netflix, it's a really great documentary to check out, especially if you're an athlete and interested in learning about where you'd be getting those proteins from. There are a lot of amazing resources online as well, and if you need help finding any of those resources, you can always reach out to us, and we are happy to provide those. So where would that protein be coming from if not from an animal source? They're looking at a plethora of options right on your screen. Things like beans, legumes, lentils are really great sources. Some forms of non-dairy milk, you definitely want to read the labels of the non-dairy milk. Soy milk will have a lot, pea protein based. There's a great brand called Ripple. Things like almond milk and cashew and oat milk will tend to have less amounts of protein, so definitely take a check at that nutrition facts label. Things like nuts and seeds, edamame, things like tofu, tempeh, seitan, and even things like quinoa can be really, really great sources of that plant-based protein. What's also really great is a lot of the same foods that give us protein in the plant-based world will also give us iron. So those same tofu, beans, legumes, lentils are really great sources. And then you've also got your leafy greens up top, your things like dried fruits like figs and raisins, and then oatmeal, which is a really great option. Many of us have had oatmeal before. Many of us probably have it at home. It's a very inexpensive way to start off the day and very easy swap to make, especially if you're thinking, hey, I could definitely do like one meal a day of plant-based eating. Breakfast can be an easy place to start by starting off with oatmeal. I like to doctor mine up with things like protein powder, and I'll do flax oil or flaxseed, hemp seeds for those omega-3s. I'll add in things like cocoa powder or maple syrup to make it a little sweeter, more like dessert. There are a lot of different recipes, again, online. You can do fruit, you can do nuts and seeds on top as well. Molasses is another great way to get a little boost of iron. And we might notice that in parts of the world where they're eating actually less dairy, you might assume that they have higher rates of osteoporosis or bone fractures. We're often told from a young age that we need to drink cow's milk in order to get strong bones. When we look at the research, that's actually not supportive. In fact, in areas of the world where they're eating less animal sources of calcium, less dairy products, they actually have lower rates of osteoporosis and bone fractures as opposed to in Western Europe and the United States, where we're drinking a lot of cow's milk, we're having a lot of dairy products in our diet, and actually seeing higher rates of osteoporosis and bone fractures. So there are other sources of calcium. If we are concerned about calcium, getting calcium from our diets, there are great sources that don't have to just come from cow's milk. We've got that tofu up there yet again, and those dried figs as well. We've also got things like fortified plant-based milks. Again, you'll want to check the nutrition label. Some have more than others. We have lots and lots of leafy greens, and if you're anything like me, you might not love the taste of those leafy greens on their own. So I cannot recommend enough to sneak your leafy greens into a smoothie. They're especially great while you're in school because you can pack a lot of nutrition into those smoothies, and it's pretty convenient in the morning. I like to buy my spinach and kale frozen because I can get it for pretty cheap and it'll last a long time. I can put like handfuls of spinach and kale in a smoothie and not taste it at all. So highly recommend. Again, there's lots of recipes online, or you can reach out to us and we can send some your way. The other way you can get calcium is with fortified orange juice. If you ever go to the grocery store and see that orange juice that has the added vitamin D and calcium, that's another great way if you're already drinking orange juice in the morning to sneak in that extra calcium. So we have seen some research that shows that dairy can play a role in acne. I will definitely say that acne can be caused by a plethora of different things. Sometimes it can be hormonal, sometimes it can be a skincare lifestyle thing. There are lots of different causes, but if acne is something that you've been struggling with, it could be worth it to try out eliminating dairy from your diet. We have seen that it can affect hormone balances and can cause some people to have higher amounts of acne. But definitely something, again, to maybe talk about with your dermatologist, talk about with your doctor, but something to be aware of. If you seem like you've tried everything, dairy could be the culprit. So this slide on food access can definitely be a huge conversation that could have an entire presentation of its own. But it is a good thing to point out that the government actually subsidizes meat and dairy, but does not subsidize fruits and veggies. And what that means is that they help give money to meat and dairy industries, which makes these products a lot cheaper. That's why a Big Mac is so much cheaper than something like a head of broccoli. What this means is that when we've got less income to work with and we're just trying to feed our family, it might make it easier for us to reach for those Big Macs instead of those, organic produce options. This means that we're seeing higher levels of things like obesity, heart disease, diabetes in lower income communities due to the fact that this monetary support just isn't really there for those healthier foods. So we also have things like food deserts where people have very limited access to places that sell these healthy foods. If the nearest food, place that they can pick up food by them is something like a gas station or a fast food restaurant, and that's the only access to food that they have, they might be more likely to eat more of those foods as opposed to those fresher produce options. So food access is definitely, like I said, a larger topic that can break out into larger discussions. And again, if you have any questions at all about this, definitely reach out to us if you need more research, more support on these. But it's a good thing to be aware of in terms of the health objectives of this industry as well. So that brings us to our last cuteness interlude. Again, use this as a stopping point if you need to talk, if you need to ask questions. Otherwise, we'll be moving right along into the positive part of this presentation, which will be on solutions. So you might have heard all this information and be thinking, what can I do to make a difference? And the amazing thing is that we have such an ability as individuals to affect change. I know that there are a ton of problems going on in the world right now, and especially with things like social media, we are so much more aware of these problems than we ever have been. So it can feel really hard to feel like I as an individual don't have the power to make a difference, that I as an individual can't change these things. That can be a really disempowering, overwhelming feeling. But with this particular issue, with the food that we're eating, we are direct consumers of these products. We sit down to eat food 3 or more times a day, which means we have so much opportunity to tell this industry what we want and what we don't want. We have this big opportunity to make a change. And I think that it's so great to know that. If you're looking at your screen, you probably have already read the quote that if everyone in the United States ate no meat or cheese, even for just 1 day a week, that would be the equivalent of taking about 7.6 million cars off the road permanently. What this means is that we don't have to commit to being vegan or vegetarian if that sounds overwhelming, that even small changes like cutting it out for a day or reducing the amount by however much is feasible in your life is a great place to start. And again, the more days that we can eliminate, the more that we can work towards elimination entirely, the more of an impact that we will have. And again, as individuals, we have a lot of ability to affect change. You might be thinking, well, I'm just one person, so how does me cutting it out really make a difference? But if you look at people like Greta Thunberg, you can see the power that one individual has to make such a big difference. So again, like I said, this doesn't have to mean that we're committing to veganism 100% right away. This can look a lot of different ways depending on what is most feasible in your life. Maybe you're thinking, okay, the idea of going plant-based overnight is a little scary, but I could definitely do a couple days a week, or maybe I could do 1 way a week. Maybe I could do 1 meal every single week or 1 meal a day plant-based. These are great ways to dip your toes in to start off with. Maybe you get your family on board and decide to make like Wednesday night dinners, the plant-based dinner night. That gives you an ability to try out new recipes, to decide what you like, what you don't like. And then after doing that for a few months, maybe it's a bit easier to be plant-based for a week or for a month or for longer periods of time because you've already figured out what foods you like and don't like. There are other ways that you could look at this as well. Something as little as next time you get pizza, get veggie pizza instead of pepperoni, or even just when you're looking down at your plate, considering putting more veggies on your plate and less animal products is a great way to make a difference. Again, we gave the example of when you're going and grabbing coffee, trying out a plant-based milk in your latte instead of a cow milk. There's a little changes we can make here or there, like getting that veggie burger at the restaurant when it is available. Again, we are happy to provide you with any resources that might make it a bit easier. We have recipes, we've got little tips and tricks we can give you as well. Fast food restaurants, you might have noticed, are really jumping on this trend of offering more and more plant-based options, which is great. It is easier to find these plant-based options than ever. Chipotle has had sofritas for a while. Sofritas is their tofu protein option. Taco Bell, it's pretty easy. Pretty much anything, you just get beans instead of beef on whatever burrito you normally get. You can order it fresco style to remove all the dairy as well. KFC actually recently released an entirely plant-based chicken bucket, and it sold out in like 2 hours. There was a line around the block. So it's a very cool to see how many changes we're making. You might have heard of the Impossible Whopper at Burger King. You might have seen that Charles Jr. has the Beyond Burger. Lots and lots of different restaurants are starting to offer these options. So definitely something to look out for next time you're checking out a menu to see what plant-based options your restaurant near you might be offering. And again, along with the fact that we have more of these options available, we're also seeing that as we increase demand for these products, as more of us are asking for these products, as more of us are purchasing these products, we're increasing the demand, which is in turn making these products become cheaper, become more widely available. We're seeing the taste is getting better and better. In fact, a lot of these products have actually been placed in blind taste tests where people could not tell the difference between the real meat and the plant-based meat. So we're seeing a lot of changes going on. We have more and more products. There's pretty much a plant-based version of everything out there these days, from Ben & Jerry's ice cream to chicken nuggets like you see in the top left. We're really coming long ways in terms of price, taste, and convenience. And you might be thinking that taste is a big factor involved. So thinking about what you normally eat and what changes you could make in those meals. We often think that we've never had a plant-based meal before, that plant-based meals are these like other things that we've never tried. But actually a PB&J on whole wheat is not only plant-based, but it actually has more protein than a McDonald's hamburger. And a lot of us probably have the ingredients for PB&Js right on our shelves right now. So something as simple as swapping out the turkey sandwich you might be eating for lunch every day for a PB&J is a great way to make a significant difference. We see that most cuisines outside of the standard American diet or standard US diet actually contain significantly less animal products. So if you are from a different country, you might notice that your traditional cuisine is using a lot less meat and dairy. A lot of your traditional dishes might have some super yummy plant-based meals, so that's a great place to start as well. When eating out, going to Ethiopian, Indian, Mexican, Thai restaurants will always have lots of plant-based options on the menu. Most places are starting to add more and more of these, but eating out at places like, Thai restaurants where you can get tofu in your pad thai instead of chicken, or Mexican restaurants where you can get beans in your tacos instead of something like carnitas are great ways to start off. You do want to make sure that you're getting all of your vitamins and nutrients. It can be very easy to fall into being what's called a junk food vegan. Those are vegans that eat lots and lots of those processed foods. So making sure that we're eating our whole foods, that we're getting all those vitamins and nutrients that we talked about from those leafy greens, those beans, legumes, and lentils like we discussed before. And this does not have to be expensive. So a lot of times we hear that plant-based diets mean that this is a really expensive lifestyle choice that we're making, but we've actually seen a lot of research to support that a person eating plant-based for a year can actually save quite a bit of money on groceries. And if you're trying to convince parents to be on board, plantbasedonabudget.com is a great resource to show them or to check out for yourself. She shows how we can be plant-based entirely on either a food stamps budget or for about $20 a week for all of your meals. There's lots of meal plans on there, recipe plans. So definitely a great resource to check out if budget is of concern. Now, aside from changing our diet, there are so many other ways we can get involved as well. This is something called cultured meat. Cultured meat is meat that's actually grown in a lab. So it is real meat. It is made out of animal proteins, except we don't have to raise an animal in order to produce it. The way that it works is they will take cells from an animal, they will bring them into a lab, culture them in the lab, and basically grow that meat. This is really great for those of us that are concerned about the environmental impact of meat, but still really like the taste and don't want to choose those plant-based options. As you can see up here, it has a really great environmental footprint, using 96% less water, 96% fewer greenhouse gas emissions, and 99% less land than traditional meat would be using. I not only like to bring up this slide to show what advancements we're making in technology, but more importantly to show that this is a very new technology. They just started receiving funding back in 2012, which means that they are opening up huge amounts of jobs, not only in research and development, but also in marketing. So if you are considering what you can do with your career, what you could do at work to make a difference that goes beyond just changing your own diet, this is one great way to get involved. Whether you love science and you want to go into research and development and come up with the new plant-based meat that tastes just like the real thing, or jump and get involved with this cultured meat, whether you love talking to people, you want to get involved in advocacy work like what we do at FFAC, whether you want to be a lawyer, work on some of the laws, make some legal changes to hold this industry more accountable. There are so many different ways that really any career, any passion can make a difference in this industry. There are other ways that don't require waiting around until we have those careers. Green Monday is an amazing organization that we've partnered with, where you can actually get more plant-based options in your school or your corporation's cafeteria. So the great thing about Green Monday is that it allows there to be more plant-based options. It makes it easier when we've got those options available. We might be more likely to pick those up. So greenmondayus.org is where you would be going to check out more information about rolling this out, either at your office or in your school's cafeteria. We've had a lot of success all over the nation with getting these campaigns installed, and we see really, really amazing prospects for the future as well. There are other ways to get involved. If you are not trying to think about your career or those institutional campaigns just yet, you can always use your time to get involved. Volunteering at an organization like one of the ones that we have listed here is an amazing way to spend your time and use your time in order to make a difference. So again, it doesn't just have to be about food. It doesn't just have to be about money. You can also use your time. These are some of the ones that we recommend. Again, we can always be a resource if you're looking for others. Or you can actually intern with us. So we have college internships, we have high school mentorship programs available. All of that is available on our website at ffacoalition.org/intern. So if you're interested in getting involved in learning more about the topics that we talked about in today's presentation, in making a difference in your community, we would love to hear from you. So definitely check us out online. We would also love to hear your feedback. So at this point, I would love if you could pause the video, head to this link on your screen. It's bit.ly/FFAC feedback. It will take you to a very short survey that just asks a few questions, should only take a minute or two, about your thoughts on the presentation. This is so that we can track our impacts. We'd love to hear from you. We'd love to hear. You can also put your information in so that we can get in contact with you if you're thinking about volunteering or interning or interested in more information from Green Monday or some resources sent to your email as well. We can be that resource for you. So feel free to give this slide a pause so that you can go to that link, check out the survey, and I will leave you all with this slide, which shows all of our contact information. So again, if you've got those questions, if you have any resource that we can provide for you, we are happy to help with that. It's info@ffacoalition.org. You can follow us on social media. It's at FFA Coalition on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. We are really vamping up our social media these days. So we're going to have lots of tips and tricks and recipes, different webinars we've got going on, different campaigns you can get involved with. So lots of really amazing resources for you on there, different facts as well, so you can continue learning more about this industry. I want to thank you so very much for listening. I know this was a lot of information, but I'm so happy that you are here listening to it. If you need to contact me, my email is Meghan, MEGHAN, @ffacoalition.org. And I thank you so very much for listening. We're looking forward to hearing from you.